This is actually a discussion with Mr. Sudhir Sethi, the founder and chairman of Chiratae Ventures. This would be a session that would be moderated by Mr. Anil Kumar himself. And here is where you would get to see the views of industry stalwarts on the India's digital economy, something that we just saw. Let's just further go ahead. Anil, all over to you.
Thank you, Jal. Good afternoon, Sudhir. How are you doing?
Hi, Anil. Thank you for inviting me here. And I was listening to your presentation, very insightful and very encouraging for the industry and consumers in India.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sudhir. And thanks for joining us as a part of this panel. Really excited to have you here and get to hear your views. So, Sudhir, I think to begin with, of course, you're among the stalwarts of the industry who've been really investing from decades and have created some of the most successful internet companies, both on the B2B and B2C side. So, really excited to have you here. And maybe I'll just start with the question about, if you look at India today, we have 600 million smartphones, give or take, little short of 200 million online shoppers, and we have 550 million plus social media and service users. What in your mind have been the key defining moments of this journey, if you just see from last 10 to 15 years?
I think the way I look at it is, and I'll take our example as a proxy to what's happening in the industry. There are many defining moments. I think I'll quote Lenin, and it's in a different context. Lenin said this, that there are decades when weeks go by and there are weeks when decades go by. India is at a stage when there are days when decades go by. The pace at which digital economy is moving is just unbelievable. There's a huge tailwind here. It's not only consumer adoption, it is also innovation of people coming in, and that is entrepreneurs. It is, as you rightly said just a little while ago, UPI, amazing. I mean, it's and now digital currency. So I think the digitization of the Indian economy is set on its path. It will only accelerate and it will make India much more efficient, whether it's a financial infrastructure or otherwise as such. So I think that's one, let's say, defining moment every year for the last, I would say, 20 years. It's accelerating now, as if the gradient of such digitization was 15 to 30 degrees, in the last 5 years. We are looking at 60 to 75 degrees right now. And that's the scale which is happening. I think the other one is, as far as consumers are concerned, and that's the topic we'll talk about, we sliced our consumers. I mean, our companies put together, and I'm not including Flipkart here, just today's current companies are reaching out to 100 million consumers. If I just aggregate the consumer base of all our companies, they are reaching out to 100 million consumers. Now, what is very interesting is, who are those consumers? Very important to look at it from a different lens, not just a shopping lens, not just a commerce or a consumer, a social or a community lens. About 50 million consumers are healthcare. And this is our portfolio. That means we are providing in some way or the other, right, 50 million consumers, some semblance of healthcare, digital healthcare. If you look at the number of consultations which our companies have provided to our consumers, it's crossed 200 million. And the pandemic was, of course, a big accelerator to that overall. If you look at the number of farmers who are using our services of our portfolio companies, it's crossed 3 million. There is a universe of 150 million farmers. In the healthcare space, there's a universe of 1.2 billion people who need efficient healthcare. If you look at financial, our companies are reaching out to about 20 million people who are consuming loans and insurance policies. And so far, our companies have given $200 billion worth of consumer policies, insurance policies, and loans to these people. Mobility, education, I think these are, to me, in the last 5 years, the lens to the consumer market for us has turned into verticals. It started off for us many years ago when commerce verticalization happened. For instance, verticalization when we entered First Cry, which is the mother's market, right? Mothers, prenatal, postnatal, children up to now the age of 10. When we entered Lenskart, it was verticalization on the eyewear market. It was not health, it was eyewear, right? Overall. And similarly, you saw Zivame. We were one of the first investors in Zivame, Pharma as an example, or Big Basket. These were commerce but vertical. Compared to Flipkart, when we entered, they were horizontal. They sold everything, right? Like an Amazon. So I think verticalization has been the multiple moments of, let's say, resonance which has happened in the country. The second big resonance which has happened, and the big moment, is the emergence of Indian brands. That's very, very crucial. And the third big moment is internationalization of commerce. Overall, 10% of our companies are today doing about 1.3 billion revenue. And our companies are today at 10% international revenue, which is about 130 million. We expect our companies, the same companies, to touch about 7 billion revenue in 5 years from now. And we expect the revenue international to be 25%. This is huge, which means in the near future, the startup ecosystem international revenue stroke exports will cross $1 trillion. And I'm talking about 5 to 6 years. And the reason for that is why it's so momentous is because if you look at India's merchandising and software exports, it's $550 million this year. And it was stagnant at merchandising was stagnant at $300 million for 6 years. So I think these are very defining moments where the startup ecosystem in the consumer market has gone through verticalization, brands emerging, as well as international revenue now coming in.
Thank you, Sudhir. I think these are big numbers, and definitely verticalization is one of the big themes which we are also seeing in the market. Now, sort of if you have to really zoom into the Indian consumer ecosystem and talk about some of the cohorts which you believe are A, underserved, and B, you believe are going to really create a big opportunity in terms of the supplier ecosystem being able to benefit out of them, and C, maybe the ability to really change the lives of these cohorts. So what would be some of those cohorts, consumer cohorts, which you believe are really ripe with opportunity but are neglected?
So I'm a believer in verticalization, and I think 600-700 million smartphones, they're bound to reach over 1.2 billion in the next few years, right? You're the pundits, you know how many years. So assume for a moment we have to reach to 1 billion people. Digitalization of the country means the billion people will have access to consumer internet. The moment you think about that you can think about saying, how do I reach them? By the way, everybody will not only buy products. Buying products is a big thing. If you look at some of the reports on why people access the internet, buying is one of them. But I think India will be very different from perhaps the US. And the reason is because the need, for instance, for healthcare is very important. I'm giving healthcare as a very big example. Now, there is a village called Kokna that is about 150 kilometers from Haldwani, which is in Uttarakhand. And I'm familiar with this because I know somebody who lives there. And if somebody is ill, it takes 3 to 4 hours to reach a hospital. Now, if I look at the healthcare paradigm, prevention, diagnostics, therapy, rehabilitation, and medicine. These are the paradigm. There's a continuum here, right? Now, the current healthcare system in the country is completely based on when somebody falls ill, come to the hospital or the clinic. That's why you have all these hospital and clinics full all the time. Now, the moment you say prevention, and I'll give you some examples of prevention, which is consumer based, you will find, India will never have enough hospitals, to my mind, in the near future, or number of nurses or clinics to serve 1 billion people. It won't have. It's just enormous. So how do you do that? You make technology reach out for prevention as an example. What is prevention? The pandemic showed us that consultation is prevention. I mean, today, consultation of home quarantine for COVID was done on the phone, right? That has been going on for 18 months right now. Now, if that serious an affair can take place, there is no reason why many, for instance, cancer. I mean, how do you do prevention of cancer? And if everybody knows the success ratio of survival at stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and as the stages go higher, survival rate goes down. But there is a connection between, let's say, on oral healthcare and cancer. If a doctor, which is a dentist, has a person walking in, and that person hypothetically has been eating pan for 20 years, as an example, and I'm not the expert on pan, and there is ulcers in his mouth, there is a potential of cancer. The moment that happens, artificial intelligence, AR, visual analytics can determine the potential of that. And the moment you feed that input to an oncologist, you can catch cancer at stage 1, which means survival rates can be huge, 90%, 95%. So the moment you do this at a consumer level, the need for providing all these, connecting the dots becomes very important. That's the only way hospitals can be less filled up. And I'm giving you this example because it's a very powerful example overall. I mean, when a woman goes to a gynecologist, right, cervical cancer can be detected. But how do you detect it? Technology can help you detect it. So the point of which I'm making is, it is important that in India, we don't follow just what's happened in the US. We know people use cell phones 5 to 7 hours a day. But if you go to agri, they're not using only for buying. They're using it for how can I improve my crop productivity. We've seen that through our companies. So I think the method to reach to 1 billion people will be very vertical, right? It will not just be commerce.
Got it. That's very helpful, Sudhir. Now, so if you see from the startups' willingness to solve these vertical problems, are you seeing that there are enough people who are coming out and solving and really getting into this whole verticalized mode? And what are the kind of challenges they're facing when they're thinking about this?
I think there is no question that the startups which we are seeing, and last year we saw 3,000 new startups. This year we are going to see 4,500, 5,000. Another 3 years from now, we'll be seeing 10,000 startups a year. This is just only us, right? The vertical solutions coming up are enormous. There is no question about it, right? We have a company called Aether, which is into medical devices on upper bionic limbs. If somebody loses an arm, right? We have a company who's, just give you a very interesting example. India consumes 4 crore catheters in the country. Catheters are the biggest carrier of infection in a hospital. So they've got antibacterial catheters. Very interesting. Now, these entrepreneurs are coming up. I think the challenge is not with the entrepreneur coming up with the solution like this for the consumer or the business. The challenge is whether investors want to back such not. I think investors have to change their mind, right? To my mind, angel investors have already changed their mind. It's the institutional investors who have to change and say, this is big. And I think the institutional investors are lagging behind there.
And do you see that changing soon?
Yes, I see that changing. I'm not saying this in a negative way. I mean, we have changed. Look, if you look at our portfolio, right, it is highly verticalized because we believe that a business which is solving real challenges which are not being solved before for consumers and businesses is going to stay for long. It will be there for 10, 20, 30 years. And it is essential to the economics and the society of the country. Now, the moment you think about that, right, those companies will survive longer. Investors, are they changing? I think they're changing. And, we always have this, I want more. I wish follow-on investors could change faster. I think the early stage investors are changing. It's the follow-on investors we need to convince to do this faster and put bigger chunks of risk capital behind such companies.
Got it. Sudhir, switching the gear a bit from healthcare to education, we've seen some of the most successful global education platforms coming out of India, right? We know Byju's, Vedantu, and a bunch of others. Now, what kind of future models do you see coming up which will solve for the underserved population in India? And just fusing this with your point about India being able to export the solutions to global market, and so how would these solutions could also be exported?
Yeah, we'll come to the international side a bit later. On the education side, I think we have a very serious challenge. In the last 2 years, I would say a bulk of the children who were being educated were not being educated, right? Why? Because they didn't have a hardware platform. And, a hardware platform is necessary because where do you get educated? So we've seen children use WhatsApp on a cell phone of their father or mother, and 3 children sharing classes which are being held on WhatsApp by a teacher. So I think the jugaad factor was very high, but the net result is that a platform has to go to the child. There is no question about it. The platform can be cell phones, the platform can, and they have to be inexpensive. The platform can be television sets. There's no question. Television set is there in 300 million or 400 million homes, right? So that can be used as a very effective tool. I think the other thing is the education side for people who can afford it and people who can't afford it. The paradigms and the models are very different overall. People who can afford it, there you'll have robotics and artificial intelligence and AR and VR, right? And that will get exported. People who can't afford it, I think it's basics. That has to be done in a very different way. Production of hardware in the country is so crucial to that because prices will go down, it will become affordable, and some amount has to be there, even free at some time. So it's a tough one for the people who can't afford it. It's very tough one. I think government intervention is required at scale, right? More than 50% of the children did not have good education for the last 2 years. I'm actually maybe 70% because they live in villages, they live in remote places. And what's valid for the upper 30%, no problem. They had everything. And that can be exported, by the way.
Got it. Talking about farmers, Sudhir, you touched upon that some of your startups are touching about 3 million of the farmers. We have about 150 million farmers in India. And have you seen any specific kind of needs which they have and kind of solutions which the tech platforms can really solve for?
Oh, yes. I mean, amazing stuff. Look, in the agri sector, technology can solve enormous issues. Agri sector is very interesting because what are the challenges which agri sector? Let me start with the challenges first, because then we will come to solutions. The average holding is 2 acres of a farm. Average income is about 1 lakh net, and that's not enough for a family of 6. So you need, subsidies are a part of this thing. I don't think we can do it away. But what's important is that crop productivity improving? Does the farmer know, soil salinity? So soil management solutions, water management solutions, crop productivity, disease management solutions are very on the ground, with feet on the ground today across the country. So how is this to be solved using technology? And I'll give obviously an example of one of our companies because I'm more familiar with it. So we have Cropin, who has now 70 million acres of land under satellite imagery. And they have the data, right? Visualization, artificial intelligence data. On each farm, they have 1,000 points of data on all the issues which I mentioned. And that data is aggregated and thrown back at the farmer.
Oh.
Okay. Now the farmer he can't understand 1,000 points of data. The farmer will say, you know what, here, take a picture of a tomato, and you can actually build a model by which you can recognize the onset of disease a few weeks earlier, or maybe a month earlier or so, or 2 months earlier. That is being done. So, and by the way, this aggregate data is also being provided on a SaaS model to the input providers. So there's a seed manufacturer who says the tomato plant seed, which I provide to, let's say, surroundings of Patiala, right, which has a different kind of soil quality, to the tomato plant in near Hubli in Karnataka, is very different. because now I know seed soil salinity. Now I know it's, in the in West Bengal, when the river comes, the Ganga river comes straight onto the sea, right? The water salinity is very high. So what do you grow there? That detailing, the micro detailing of soil and other factors of farming is what this company provides. Its vision is to do 300 million acres of land in the world. And down the line, 1/3 of land mass to be done by satellite imagery monitoring. Now that's a different vision altogether. And that can be provided only by technology, not by feet on the ground. Okay. So that's an example of how consumers can benefit. There are 150 million farmers. There are 600-700 million people who are dependent on farming in the country. That will how you benefit, as one of the examples. The second example I can give you is, if you look at losses in storage, it varies. 5%, 10%, 20%, 30%, right? Now that's a huge loss. You produce and rats eat every day. So this is a challenge in the market space. And I'm not talking as an impact investor. I'm talking as a financial investor, right? Now, they have a company called Orgos who set up a B2B platform to benefit farmers by micro warehousing and ensuring that that loss goes down substantially by more than 70-80%. If you reduce storage and if you storage losses, it's a huge benefit of income to the farmer. The next layer, apart from farmer benefits or crop benefits, is the next layer where farmers need capital. The biggest issue for them is crop insurance. The biggest issue is lending to them. When you want to sow the next seed, right, they need money. But if you force them to sell the agri product at that point of time, that means they have to sell at a loss. So how do you do this? So the next layer is fintech on farmers' platform. So I can go on and on, but this is the need of the hour in the country, and technology is already solving it in a small way right now. How do you scale it up? By the way, the same thing will be applicable in other countries across the world overall. So absolutely, the farmer community, if you take a horizontal to them, right, you may succeed a little bit, but if you take a vertical to them, which is relevant to them, that vertical will succeed enormously.
Got it, Sudhir. Certainly, I think it looks like there's a great amalgamation of vertical, horizontal, and deep tech, which is coming by in some of these solutions. And how do you see that? Because traditionally, when we've seen the tech companies or e-commerce companies, right? So they've been three different things altogether. Deep tech and the horizontal and vertical have not gone very well together. They've not been integrated that well together. Are you seeing a lot of that happening? And is that a big change which will happen in the near future? It's
happened already at small scale. The integration, I always believe that parallel lines meet, and that's what is happening, right? There is health, there is agri, there is mobility, there is climate, then there is horizontal B2B, there is horizontal consumer. You can add communities to it, you can add social commerce. These have to meet whenever there is a, and this only technology can do, by the way, right? Only technology can do. And I think from a national perspective, the platforms, which is the India stack, including UPI, etc., which has been built, are absolutely massive game changers, right? Massive game changers already there. I think today now these things are being used. So I think for us, we are looking at these scaling massively right now. I would say on a scale of 10, these companies would have scaled 20% right now. Now we are taking them to a bigger scale. By the way, it doesn't have to be the tier 2 and tier 3 towns, right? Even in, let's say, CureFit or Healthify Me, one of our companies, massive change happened in the last 2 years. All their gyms shut down. So this is a new paradigm. They opened up home health fitness, and suddenly new consumers in urban areas came in. 60% or 55% of the consumers who came in were women now, which was not the case when the physical gyms were there. Right? So that's interesting, because that, if you take a horizontal, women consumers participation, I mean, out of our 100 million consumers, about 35 to 38% is women right now. That's a huge number. It used to be 10, 15%.
Amazing. I think we are running close to the end of the discussion. Sudhir, maybe before we end, how do you see the next 5 years of consumer tech and overall startup ecosystem, not only consumer tech, evolving? What are your few golden words where will we see in India by 2025-26?
Look, I'm not a crystal ball gazer, but I see scale, massive scale. In our own portfolio, we have 5 companies running towards 1 billion revenue. So valuation is a derivative. I think many of the reports which I see are valuation, so many unicorns. But let's start, I would even request RedSeer, let's start telling the world that real businesses are being built, right? India will have, to my mind, in the next 5 years, at least 50 companies whose revenue is 1 billion each, right? 1 billion. And I'm saying those are solid companies which have never existed before. Of course, they'll go public and so on and so on. That's fine. The second thing is that internationalization of these, we've already spoken about verticalization, so I won't gather into that. Internationalization, India's startup ecosystem in export terms, in international revenue terms, will be bigger than today's merchandise and software exports. Okay? Now, the third element is very important. 95% of risk capital, which is coming into India, is all international capital, and kudos to that. I think if I take the last 5 years of capital inflow into the country, by up till 2021, it was about 200 billion. Exits were about 100 billion. I expect in the next 5 years, India to absorb 500 billion. Now, what is important is that in the last 5 years, less than 5% of that capital was from Indian investors, which is corporates, family offices, and so on and so forth. However, in the next 5 years, I think this will increase. Now, China was 60% a couple of years back, domestic capital. Domestic capital, to my mind, has a very important role to play. I would like to see this go to maybe 30% in the next 5 to 6 years. And the reason for that is that India has capital, right? There is no question about it. India has capital. That capital is not participating in creating new companies to the extent which it can. And which also means that they are missing out on the wealth creation which is happening in the country. Just to give you an example, global wealth creation from technology in 2020 was 29%. And the global wealth creation from technology 10 years back, before 2020, was 6%. In India, it is between 1 to 2% at this moment at an aggregate level. Now, I think the glass is 1/10 full right now. So unless Indian families, Indian institutions do not participate in backing technology companies, they will not get to the participation of 29% of wealth creation in India.
Thank you very much, Sudhir. I think these are golden words. I am pretty confident that all of these would turn true in coming time. We are all believers on the internet economy. And thank you very much for taking out time, Sudhir. It was really a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and all the best. Stay safe.